quick rundown of what happened in the stock market. So very interesting thing with the stock market. I'm just going to talk this one out real quick. So there's this thing called the yen carry trade, right? So what happened with that? Japan was like the only country left in the world who had their interest rates at zero. Everybody else had it at like 3, 4, or 5%. So what was happening is all of these big institutions that, trade all day, every day, they were borrowing money in yen at 0% interest and then buying stocks like Nvidia with it. All right. So this works out great because you're saving money on the interest. So, I mean, the crazy thing about this is that we've all been saying, why isn't it the 5% rates impacted the US stock market at all? I mean, we went from 0% to 5% within like, I think either less than a year, maybe 18 months at the very most. So everybody's saying, why hasn't the rates impacted the US stock market? Well, big reasons because, normally a reason it impacts is because you stop borrowing to buy stocks because it's not as cheap. But if you're able to go to a different country, just this one country who has 0% rates still because of a systematic problem that they have where they can't put rates at a certain level, then you essentially still have zero rates. You have 0% rates still if you're able to work around the 5% rates in your country. So some people are estimating that this is a $10 trillion situation where there's potentially $10 trillion worth of yen borrowed to buy US stocks. So think about that for a second. And what set this thing off the other day is that I'll show a chart of this quick. The yen started to strengthen just a little bit because they raised rates. So let's say yen to dollar exchange rates. All right, ready? Check this out. All right, see? So in the past month, see that quick rise up? So the yen got stronger because they put interest rates up. And when that happens, it gets far more expensive to pay back the borrowed yen that you borrowed in bulk to buy US stocks. And at the same time that it takes more dollars to pay back the yen that you borrowed, the asset that you bought with that borrowed yen money is going down because everybody else is doing the same thing. So essentially, I mean, Wall Street always finds a workaround to squeeze, the best situation out of the cards they've had dealt to them possible. And, I mean, it's a smart thing. A lot of people made a ton of money off the yen carry trade, and it's definitely not over. I mean, yesterday was just a little air pocket that got exposed because I think some of the calculations people were doing, you could have went from being up 3x on a trade to down 9x on a trade because of how much more expensive it got to pay back your yen that you borrowed. So don't want to nerd out and get all deep into that, but that's one of the biggest things that happened yesterday. And I mean, I think that we all know realistically we're due for a pretty big pullback in the market. I mean, yesterday was nothing. It was like what? Went for the S&P went from I think 56 to 52. It was like 4%, 3%. I mean, whenever the big liquidity event happens, I think it's gonna touch around 4,000. But I mean, this is just me talking shit. Because I heard a really good breakdown of this the other day that for those of you who really know about this stuff, the what is it? We've been doing quantitative tightening for the past year now, I think, which here I'll pull up a chart. Quantitative tightening. QT Fed. So what that means is that the Federal Reserve is shrinking its balance sheet, shrinking the amount of bonds that it owns. Instead of buying bonds, adding liquidity to the market that was not previously there, they're letting their bonds expire, and that's reducing the amount of money that's in the system. And that is the main driver of asset prices. 1 second. I'm going to show you this chart. Fed balance sheet. Here we go. All right, boom. Fed balance sheet. So this is basically the amount of bonds and mortgages that the Fed buys or the Fed owns right now. It peaked at almost 9 trillion in 2022, but they started selling or letting it expire, roll off their balance sheet in 2022. This little spike right here, something I made a big deal about. This was the what the hell was the acronym for it? This is what they did during Silicon Valley, where they were buying the bonds back face value from the banks, and they're trying to act like it wasn't QT, but it was QC, or excuse me, that it wasn't QE, but it was QE. The Bank Term Funding Program, that's what it was called. So today we're all the way back down at 7.1 trillion from a high of 8.9 trillion. Now that's a big chunk, especially when you're talking about global liquidity, because trust me, global liquidity, the amount of money in the system, that's the biggest contributor to to what asset prices are. That's why everything exploded higher in the 70s after they took us off the gold standard. And I mean, if you're lucky enough to have bought a house before, during the 70s, you kept up with inflation pretty well. So no, I went on a bit of a rabbit hole or tangent there, but oh yeah, I brought this up to say that I heard this really smart professor guy say a few weeks ago that we've reduced the money supply by like 4% in the past year or something like that, and the only time we've like never done that without there being a significant market crash or whatever. And that he was saying that the Fed is not cutting rates fast enough with how quickly we're reducing the money supply. But let's be honest, this is all uncharted territory. I've been expecting the market to go down for the past 4 years. Literally, I didn't even think it was going to bounce back after the big COVID drop. I mean, I've always had a bearish bias because everything is just so crazy when you look at it that it's like miraculous that the thing is still propped up. But since 2008, the Fed has really, conditioned people into just drinking the Kool-Aid that everything's going to keep going up. I mean, we've done quantitative easing since 2010. I mean, if you got in then, you're in a pretty good situation. I'm jealous of the people who blindly listened and followed to that, because you made up pretty well. But you would think that a correction's got to happen pretty soon, but you also got to factor in the situation where we just injected 6 trillion into the economy. Like, we don't have a case study for how that impacts the stock market, or how long that impacts the stock market for. We've never doubled the amount of money that's in the entire system before. So that could be a 10-year thing where it props up the market. It could be, at the tail end of it right now. Who knows? I mean, maybe we've established an entirely new floor, but if you look at just keep going into a rabbit hole here, but this is something that we got to question. Let me pull up the S&P. So if you go to an all-time chart of the S&P, ready? Like, it just looks silly. Here we go. Bear with me. If you go to an all-time chart of the S&P, it just looks silly. We're go back to the 90s. You're bopping around 1,000. Yeah, nothing crazy. Then, like I said, after 08, start doing the QE. Boom, boom, boom. Nice steady rise to 2000. Little dip. What was that? There's a little uncertainty dip in 2015. Then under Trump, rips higher. COVID pullback, and then boom, inject the money into the economy. start raising rates, miraculously still goes up after raising rates, and then here we are. I mean, again, totally guessing, talking out my ass. Who the hell knows? I wouldn't be shocked if it gets back to 3,000 eventually someday. I mean, I hope it does, because I feel like a chump throwing money into this right now. But I definitely am of the mindset that's a responsible thing to do, to dollar cost average yourself into the S&P over the course of your life, because, I mean, look at it. Start from any point here, and you're in a good situation if you dollar cost average yourself into the S&P over the course of your life. Just, it's an uncomfortable thing to deal with it, looking at it at the very top. But I don't know, maybe this will be a 10,000 in 4 years. Who knows? Anyway, that's the stock market breakdown.